Hello, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of, yes, you got it, Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice. And yes, we're playing as Japan. So we're going to continue this. Now, are these guys, well, they're still technically defending. Oh, let's speed this up a little bit. Okay. Attack into there. Attack into there. Some cavalry battles. And they're being counterattacked, which I figured they would, so that's why I didn't put everybody into both attacks. The guys that weren't as well organized to do the defending. Okay, rare materials. Oh, we'll wait a day or so to get all of our convoys actually reactivated from starting. Yeah, that's just what I was worried about, them getting there. But we are pushing, hopefully well, around. Okay, there we go. So we're up by 1. So we sort of would like good relations with Italy. So we're going to go with Italy's offer. And it's a reasonable size 1. I'd really like to cut these guys off. And destroy them in another pocket. Oh good, we're here now. They're here now. Now they can support that attack there. Now, sorry if I get the name wrong, but I think it was Dark Star was posting and disagreed, probably 2 episodes ago now, about my idea about the AI and thinking that they should try to withdraw from the pocket before getting trapped. And his point was, in a sort of, it has merit. Trust me, it has merit. I disagree with it ultimately, but it does have merit in that the dying and fighting of the units that were in this pocket really delayed and tied up a lot of units, okay, for Japan, and it did do that. Now, and his point was manpower in China, they have plenty. Well, even if that's the case, and I don't know if it is, I mean, that's the myth about the Soviet Union is that it had plenty of manpower. No, by about the end of the war, it was exhausted of manpower. Not quite exhausted in the way Britain was, but they couldn't just keep constantly, you know, it wasn't a bottomless pit. They were getting down to the bottom of the manpower pit by the end of the war with the Germans. Now, of course, they were in Berlin when they're you know getting in, and in the sort of immediate pipeline, they could lose a lot of people. Where Britain, by the time you're starting to get to the Bridge Too Far movie, the Battle of Arnhem and whatnot, they're really exhausted. They're exhausted of manpower, and so you see throughout the sort of the whole excuse me, the whole post D-Day British campaign is fought aggressively, but is very much fought in the way to minimize combat losses. And you go, well, they just care more about the people. No, it isn't that way. Because you can, old blood and guts Patton, and that sort of, you see that clip in the movie about him. Yeah, his guts and our blood, or whatever the other guy sort of says back to him. Well, Patton does, both at the time and since the war, really has a reputation of being sort of careless of casualties. But if you look at his actual casualties as a percent of the size of the force, he has the lowest casualty rates. Because he knew that to take 10 casualties today to take that hill, now, push whatever the casualties are, take that hill and we lose 10 people. I'm just using an arbitrary figure. But to do it carefully and lose 5 people a day and take 3 days to lose it, to get the hill, you've lost 15 people to achieve the same objective. Just it's 5 less per day, true, but you achieve the objective sooner so that the battle is over quickly, and then you pursue the enemy before they have a chance to reorganize. So you may lose a few extra people in pursuing the enemy, but instead of coming up against a well-planned ambush 2 or 3 days later, like have no losses, say, for a couple of days while the enemy's retreating and you're reorganizing and getting ready, and then you pursue them, they've had a chance to set up a good ambush, you lose more people. So if you look at his army, compared to the other armies, something on size, they've done an analysis of it, that he had the fewest casualties for the time, for similar time period, for whatnot. So he was better than Omar Bradley, the GI's friend, a former enlisted man himself, and who always prided himself in taking care of the GI and making sure that he's good. And Bradley's a great general. I'm not knocking Bradley, but Bradley has this reputation that Patton doesn't. But Patton gets more of his people home alive. So, this is what I'm talking about, but that's not sort of what I'm talking about the British. The British are really skittish about any losses. It's they are drained. You see the sort of talk on the longest day between Sean Connery and the other unknown, I don't know who he is, actor, that they're landing at whatever beach, let's get them back for Dunkirk, and yeah, I bet you were there. So there were guys, if not in immediate, I don't know, presumably there were a few that showed up on D-Day, but there are guys landing in the sort of post-D-Day British offensives that are Dunkirk survivors. So they had been at war that long, since before, because it may be the phony war, but since before 1940, they had been at war continuously. Now, maybe a lot of time of it they were sitting back in Britain waiting for the invasion that didn't come, but they had been at war for that long. And so Britain is really drained. Okay. Now, the Soviets aren't that drained. The Chinese, they've got lots of people. They really do. The Japanese have lots of people too. I'm not saying the comparative manpower is the same. And so, and then you have one reality, which I'm always thinking about while playing this game, and then two, the game itself. Now, China has lots of units. Yes. And there may be spawns that spew up more units. But we see, like, as in some of these things it did, I think, are these conscription guys, maybe these militia guys, versus proper infantry divisions. And if we look at this as, and we have to do that, you build units here. How many light armor units is China going to have? This is maybe one of the very few I've seen that's there. And, you know, a light infantry and motorized battalion here with heavy AA. Okay, that is actually pretty good for them. So yeah, you have this situation that they have a lot more. But how many times are you going to have a pocket that you're going to lose everybody? Now, I will grant the idea that if you were, say, holding here effectively, because it has these defenses, if you're holding here, which I'm presuming has about the same, or you're holding in here, which is urban and easier to defend, that is going to be a better defensive point than, say, holding at these provinces here. I'm picking these because they're not rivers. So, yeah. But you have to balance the idea. I, as a thinking person, would put some forces to sort of die in place. But they would be targeted as to the location. You know, they wouldn't be sitting here. They'd be sitting either here or in here. And there might be one or two of these militia units, but they wouldn't be much more than that. I would be getting the rest of them out. So, I think it was Dark Star. We gave them money. We've got money. We need fuel. Okay. So, yeah, it's a good point, but it's not good enough for me to think that they shouldn't be withdrawing at all. Sort of what happens with Hitler and dying in place. Now, Hitler believes, wrongly or rightly, but believes firmly, we need supplies there, so let's start flying. I know we were flying somewhere else with supplies, but let's yeah, while we can, let's attack here. Hitler believes in the idea of how do I put this? The will as the sort of primary factor of victory or loss. Just the will to fight, the will to persevere, the will to move forward. And I'm going to agree that will is a major element in it. No. We already have enough problem with become another light armor unit. So get you out of the front line. And that is some of the reason Japan is doing so well. Because if you look at it, at times there are divisions of the Chinese have better levels of equipment. I'm not sure if better levels of supply as in available number of machine gun rounds or available number of artillery rounds, because hey, if I've got 10 guns but I only got 10 rounds per gun, but you've got 3 guns and you have 300 rounds per gun, 300, you have 3 times as many rounds to shoot. It probably about equalizes out or moves more in your favor, because sure, you can spread your 10 guns out into more areas and shoot at a few critical spots, spread out a bit more, but simply having the more rounds there ready to go can very much mean that you can be more effective with your ammo, or in firing a lot of. Okay, you can't go there. Can't even go there, so I don't know about that. Okay, so they're going back to here. So if we take this, they're trapped, because I'm guessing from what we know from here, they only have level 1. Where I guess we can't. They can't. So they're trapped. Okay. Either way, they're trapped if we get this. That's good to know. I thought they would be able to escape. Oh well, no, they can escape there. But they can't escape through here. Okay, that's good. So the amount of ammo is an important and a significant thing, and this is especially some of like D88D, the 88th or D88, however I forget. The 88th Division was one of the sort of premier nationalist divisions. That had a okay, you go. Oh, you can't. Oh, you're defending. Okay. Okay, mixed support, dude. You get to get attached to where you belong. So there we go. Now you are a better unit. Don't want to push too far and get cut off, but we'll go to there. And you can support that attack just to make sure it goes well. Let's get there. So we know that, there were some good. No, you don't need to be way up there. Come down here and use your armored train to suppress partisans. We know they had some good divisions like that. But I think when the Japanese came up against them, and I don't know the details of the orders of battle and some of the stuff, but I think the Japanese had more will to win. But I am firmly convinced that had we ever seen and Guadalcanal and or Burma may be the closest thing to it, but had we ever seen because the U.S., the original plan in MacArthur, and we always talk about, oh, well, we dropped the atomic bombs and it saved, however many millions of Japanese plus 1 million American soldiers that we figured it would have taken if we had to invade Japan to finally win. And they're right. They're right about all of that. And I think MacArthur wanted to invade Japan. And he had a lot of political power. He had a lot of power. And he was a great man. He, like many or most great men, he has significant flaws, and we can talk about some of them. But if you look at even, he's often called American Caesar, and as in, oh well, he wants to be a dictator. Well, he was sort of the American Caesar or the American shogun for Japan, and did a marvelous job at reorganizing and setting up Japan. So he is a great man. We can talk about his sort of personality flaws of being flamboyant in the press and trying to take credit for a lot of other people's stuff, including his subordinates' decisions and whatnot. Yeah, and I may agree with all of your criticisms of MacArthur that you may have, especially as I've talked to my historian uncle. Oh well, who wins who's right? The president or the general, when the general says to do something, because over his fight with Truman over what to do in Korea. Well, the president's always right because he's the president. He may make a bad decision, but you follow the president's decision even if you know it's a wrong one, or you resign or whatever. You don't defy him, and because MacArthur was sort of kind of defying him a bit, sort of, you know, the old you're breaking up, sir, can't hear what you're saying so clearly, or whatever. It wasn't quite that, of course, but that sort of type of stuff later on in Korea. And of course his Incheon landings. Now he miscalculates about China entering the war in Korea. He does miscalculate that. Like, I will agree. MacArthur has his... Now, is that a flaw or just simply a miscalculation? You know, you got to make a decision. Got to make a decision one way or another. Do you halt at X line in Korea and whatnot? Or do you push to the border of China and stop and end the war? You know, what do? You have to make these decisions. And they both may be wrong. There may be no good decision, because if you stop, you know, I don't know, somewhere around here or something, you'll end up with a North Korean rump state that is, you know, communist and, you know, is a bad decision. Or you come up here and you trigger Chinese involvement. You know, is there a right answer? Of course there's a right answer. You convince the Chinese before they intervene, one, you are not going to go across the, what is it, the Yalu River or whatever up here, and that you are not going to invade them or help the nationalist Chinese, and you convince them that, and you convince them that if they don't intervene, things will go better for them. And can you convince them that? I don't know if you can, but you try to allay their fears before they take action, and you try to stoke their fears in that if they do take action, mushroom clouds will be showing. Now, I think MacArthur did want to use some mushroom clouds, meaning nuclear weapons, not, you know, blasting out Peking and Shanghai and whatnot, but sort of in a local area to destroy some of the Chinese concentrations of troops that would allow us to stabilize the border along the Korean, you know, Chinese border, and then go, okay, now China, we're going to negotiate a peace, sort of like what, you know, they did down here, but we're negotiating it up here, and Korea is unified. Now, would those mushroom clouds have led to other mushroom clouds? So I don't know if at that date China had nukes. I don't think they did. But with the Soviets, because I know they get nukes eventually, of course China does, and I just don't know right offhand the date on that. But by at that point, the Soviets, and to some degree I think in the early 50s, the Soviets are bluffing, and America's believing the bluff. A lot of the, you know, the military-industrial complex, you know, people look back over, you know, estimated, because that's what they wanted to believe, the amount of Soviet nuclear weapons and their effectiveness, and, you know, and blah, 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 blah. Well, the Soviets were doing their damnedest to make us believe that they had lots of nukes and that they could effectively target them on you know, places, whether from the air or through missile, you know, airplanes or missiles. They were doing their damnedest to. So, and I think it's, I know, Soviet apologists, leftists, and other people that just felt that we should have peace with the Soviet Union, and by having peace with the Soviet Union is to passively let them take over, because any sort of resistance to them would be mean violence, and so we'll just let the world revolution take over. You know, want to say it, well, that was just for power and for, and I know there's a few viewers out there who've sort of spouted, maybe not on this particular issue, but these types of views. They're just for you know, personal power and the industry companies to make more money. Well, it's also the responsibility of your Defense Department to go, they could have between 10 and 100 nuclear weapons is our thing. And we think they could and we believe that they could have 100. So we must prepare as if they have 100, because if we don't, we're not doing our jobs right. Now, maybe they've only got the 10 weapons, but we have good information, maybe incorrect, but we have good information that they could have 100 nuclear weapons. So we have to be prepared for that. You know, that's a responsible action. Now, some people will call it fear-mongering, and maybe the people running around and said, no, they have 1,000, they have 1,000, or, you know, I'm making up these numbers. But, you know, somebody out there probably was fear-mongering just for fear-mongering. But responsible people have got to give responsible answers that they think are possibles. So, back to MacArthur. Like I say, he wanted to invade because he's an army general and that's what he does, fights battles. The Navy plan was, and this was more and more what was going to happen, and sort of the Air Force plan too, they agreed with this, was not to invade Japan, but to cut it off via the sea. I mean, in the later stages, they're sending carrier groups all around up in here and striking at any sort of seaborne activity. And mostly, I think, for the Navy, attacking air bases and threats to the ships, you know, direct threats to the ships, where the Air Force was trying to bomb factories and that type of things, you know, the factories making the aircraft and other threats to the ships. The Navy was mainly trying to, you know, get immediate threats in their operation, as well as doing a lot of submarine operations and trying to sink transports, while and the Navy very much wanted the Air Force to do it once they got enough, and I talked about this before, dealing with the tactical and immediate threats, I should say, to do the sort of strategic bombing is to pound Japan industrially, you know, back into the Stone Ages until they surrendered, and just keep that up, keep inflicting the pain on them until they surrendered. And it would stop as soon as they surrendered, which is what it did. So the nuclear weapon 2 strikes were, like I've said before, a bit of a bluff. I think they had a few more weapons, sort of, you know, individual bombs being developed. I'm not an expert on it, but I think there was. But they had no ability to, like, drop 1 bomb a day. They sent 2 out to the Pacific, and that was it, you know, at that point. Now they might, like I say, I think we're working on other stuff, and then could have sent a few more, but not immediately, and not like a daily or even a weekly bombing ongoing with nuclear weapons. It was a bit of a bluff, but it falls in line with their city destruction. Japan's industry had been for some time more and more dispersed, so you couldn't just hit the ball bearing factory and everything shuts down. No, it was much more dispersed, and they were busy building weapons of all types. Many of them are things that never got used, like some of their better tanks that they were still building. Some of their earlier, the Hago type tanks, that are still using them in China, had been using them in Burma and other places, and you even see a few of them used on some of the islands. Still getting to my point, trust me. But I haven't lost sight of that. But they had developed limited numbers, but better tanks. They kept them in Japan, thinking they're going to need to shoot at American tanks with them defending Japan, and their sort of thinking. And so the American Navy, who did not want to go into Taiwan because it was seen to be a Japanese stronghold. Maybe not all the citizenry there is loyal Japanese citizens, but they were pretty much cooperated and worked along with the Japanese rulership. They wanted to avoid that and come. You can look at a map. There was still some coastline that was sort of Chinese nationalist held, just because the Japanese really hadn't pushed into it, as well as moving in to take some territory, to put some bases here. And there was even talk in planning level of stuff to maybe take, like maybe around Busan or something, take some bases here in our area in Korea, to get some bases to further cut off communications, trade, whatnot, whatever you want to call it, supply, and increase effective bombing, more bombing airfields instead of just out here on Saipan and out here on Guam with the emergency field on Iwo Jima, because that's about sort of what it was. And yes, they had taken Okinawa, but they still hadn't yet really organized that up. So it would have, I personally believe that, and so, okay, so all of these battles out here, and to a similar extent, all of these battles, including the stuff in the Philippines, you get the idea of they aren't just an American division versus a Japanese division. They are American air power concentrated. They are American sea, naval gunnery bombardment concentrated. There is, a limited amount of forces available to any one of these Japanese commanders in the Philippines because they primarily have an occupation army. So you can't, pull the divisions here and quickly move them up here if the Americans are blocking much shipping. So had they landed on the coast here, had they fought the Japanese, who we see are very determined fighters, very much have that spirit and willing to fight. I was talking about what Hitler believes that is the primary thing. I think you would, and so you come up, and not that the Americans don't have the spirit and willingness to fight, but I think you would see the overwhelming American firepower come in and just, like it did other places, but just within a division to just overwhelm their spirit and willing to fight. So the firepower of an American division versus a Japanese division, the American is just overwhelming, and it's in two basic factors. One, in the number and types of weapons, the caliber and the ranges of the artillery and all that stuff, and two, the ability to feed supplies to those guns. A Japanese soldier and an American soldier can both carry on their person about the same amount of machine gun ammunition for the platoon's machine gun or something. Okay, as well as their rifle and their immediate bullets for their guns, but they may carry an ammo can or a couple of ammo cans on their back to feed that machine gun, or have a few extra mags for their squad automatic. That's how often these things worked. So you sort of divided up the load between some of the members of the rifle platoon, or but to deal with the machine gun in it. They're going to basically be able to carry the same amount. But the Americans, combination of having more and having more trucks to drive from whatever the depot is, some depot on the coast, to wherever the battle is, faster, carrying more, drop it off, turn around, and go get more, and feed more ammo to the units. And so I think you see a similar with some of the premier Chinese divisions that fight around in this area. Some of the premier units were fighting up here that get destroyed, and then the other sort of premier units are fighting and get destroyed here. From my understanding, again, I'm not an expert on the Chinese side of the war by any means, not even an expert on the Japanese side, but less so. After that point, after the fall of Nanking here, and sort of the immediate thing, no more premier Chinese divisions ever face off against the Japanese. Maybe some of the stuff we can talk, and we've talked about the tax army dealing with keeping the Burma Road open. Maybe you could say some of that is some of the premier Chinese divisions. But even then, I'm not so sure that there would be considered the premier, particularly in equipment-wise. Training-wise, I think there were some of the better ones. Because to a point, Chiang Kai-shek understands that if he puts his remaining best divisions, however good they were, up against the Chinese, they're going to be defeated eventually, and he can't replace them. Again, we're going back and talking about this manpower element, because it isn't just about bodies. It's also about training and leadership, and those are two different things. that are related to each other, because you train leaders, but leaders train the troops, and then the leaders lead the trained troops into combat. You know, so they're related, they're interrelated. And two, part of what makes them premier divisions is their equipment and levels of supply. That if you just lose those, he has no ability to replace them. And so he keeps them out of the battle because he sees the war with Japan as a disease of the skin, where he sees the war with the communists as a disease of sort of like the internal organs of the body. The skin is annoying, but isn't going to kill you in his view. It's the cancer inside you that's going to kill you with the communists. So he wants to keep, and it's partially to keep his power too from other potential nationalist leaders. You know, the idea is not that they're all like with their knives out ready to wanting to take over, but if the top leadership makes too many stupid moves, he needs to be replaced. You know, I mean, that's just the case. So to keep that from happening, being replaced, he keeps a core of reliable troops and commanders near him. These are some of his better units, and could say to both the people and to the other generals, well, yeah, we're fighting, we've got units on the front line, yeah, they're not the best, but we need to keep the best back here to control our, you know, our supply lines and fight off the last desperate battle. If they get back here, they're sort of the buffer zone troops. Legitimate things to say. So you know, the pocket here, and we'll see what we get closed versus what gets out, but I don't think, other than these two divisions here possibly, I don't think anything more is getting out. And I don't know how many is sitting here right now. We don't have a good look in, where we can sort of see here a bit more. But if you keep killing these units, they're going to fade away. Japan, you know, so the units that have the will to fight are not going to be around anymore. Okay, we've won out here, and mountain unit training has advanced. Okay, that is here. Okay, we're about the best number. Yeah, let's do that. That looks better, actually. So this is useful. We have a few in training, but radios will sort of help everywhere, so we want to do that. Okay, so they're pushing down into there, they're defending there. I don't want to push any further than here because we're just not quite fast or mobile enough to... It looks like they're going to close that. Pocket, and it just looks like, oh, we went over here. Okay. Well, I think we're going to end the episode on that. Enough rambling by me. I hope. Always leave them wanting more, I guess, is a good tip. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and post your questions, comments, suggestions, tips, corrections. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.